Hey everyone, in this video I'm going to show you the steps that I use to fix like a rust hole or a damaged area on a fender or a body panel so you can do this at home. Alright, I'm going to use this damaged fender here to simulate what I would do to make a repair. And yeah, so I'm going to simulate just right here with a marker that we've got an area of rust that we want to fix, or maybe something's dented. Oof, markers smell good. Man, it's been a while since I've had a cap off a real big Sharpie like that. All right, so you can see that our rust spot is almost dry. And the first step in doing this is I'm just going to cut out around the fender or the area that needs to be fixed. It's nothing really too scientific about it. It's just making a cut larger than the area you would need. If this was actual rust, you may have already ground this down and ground the paint back a bit. Since it's simulated rust, I haven't done that, but I'm just going to cut around the outside here and give us our opening that we're going to repair. All right, the next step that I'm going to take is to just dress the outside of this area. For that, I'm just going to use a flap wheel, but you could use anything. You could use a cinder block, you could use sandpaper, you could use, I don't know, whatever you like. You could use a file. I don't know how I'd use any of those things. I'd probably just stick to this or sandpaper. All right, now that we've got our piece removed, I also find it kind of helpful to put a little reference mark on the piece, just so I know which way it's supposed to go back in. This is not the piece we're going to use. We're actually going to make a piece out of scrap. So let me go find a piece of sheet metal that I can use to duplicate this. And you'll notice it's got a little bit of a curve on it. So we'll have to improvise that as well. You may find it easier if you don't have a piece of metal that's already pre-bent to your hole. Just use an old piece of a cereal box or thin cardboard, whatever you like. And you're just going to hold it up on the back side of that as you throw your patch panel on the ground. Just going to hold it on the back side of there and just trace around. So now you have a tracing of your hole. And you can cut your cardboard is way easier to cut than metal. That's why we use cardboard, because it's so easy to work with. And you can tape it together if you cut it too much. Cut it again. And then you can kind of work the cardboard to see how it fits. It's not always as easy if you don't have access to the backside. So right there, it's a little tight on this end. Look at that next level maneuver. Just going to trim a little bit off of that side. There we go. Still feels like it's a little snug right down in this corner down here. There we go. Now we have our cardboard that we can transfer. You can transfer your cardboard right over to your sheet metal that you're going to use for the repair. And then we just cut this piece out and start shaping it. Now that you've got your piece cut out, you can compare it to your template. See if there's any spots that are a little too proud. And you can see right there, I got to trim that down a little bit on that side. Trim a little bit through there. So you can either do that on here or you can do it on the fender, whichever way you want to do it. I'll trim it here. All right, now for the fun part. We have our piece, which hopefully matches what we cut out. It looks to be a little bit bigger, but that's okay. We can always trim it. We can always make it smaller. We can't make it bigger. So this is the part that we need to modify. We need to get something that has that amount of curve in it so that we can put that curve into that metal. A lot of times you might just try bending it over something round-ish that you have laying around the shop. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. It can even be just the body of your angle grinder, which we've unplugged from the wall just in case we do something silly. But we have our reference here, and we're just gonna put a little bit of bend in it there, which might be too much. So it's just kind of a trial and error thing here. A little bit at a time. Kind of comparing your work. Maybe you got to bend it back a little bit. Just a little bit here and there. So that looks like that's pretty close to our piece that we cut out. And now that we have our reference mark, we know which way it's supposed to point. I'm going to put a reference mark on this one. And make sure you dress the sides, just in case there's any weird coating there that came on your sheet metal. I did the back side too, just deburred it. Now we have our fender. Kind of take a look here and see how this all lines up. So just by looking at it here, I'm going to have to make a little bit of a trim. You can see I got it about that much too big, but that's an easy thing to fix. So we'll just trim that back, and then we should be ready to go. All right, now take a look and see how this fits. And that looks like that fits pretty good. Now you may not be happy with the little ripples right here that I put in it when I was bending it. You might wait till you get it welded in, and then we can hammer and dolly that out a little bit and kind of make that match the contour of the fender. If you're going for a Bondo-less finish, you will definitely want to use a TIG welder to do this. But most of us at home that have access to a welder, or our buddy has a welder, it's going to be a MIG welder. So the difference is the weld is going to be a little bit harder. It's going to be a little bit more difficult to work and get smooth, but less technique and skill required to do MIG welding versus TIG welding. So the last step before we weld that in is I'm going to clean off the back of the fender here real quick and make sure that that's clean so we don't get any contamination in the weld. All right, if you have access to one of these triangle magnets, they're a pretty good tool to have for this. I've used blue tape before, just because I didn't have access to a magnet. So just get your piece lined up here, and the magnet will help hold it in place. I fortunately have two magnets, so I can use it that way. You may have to move this piece around a little bit on the magnets. So you can see here, we've got it pretty well centered. You can see there where I cut too much. That's okay. We're just going to tack that up real quick. That'll be an easy thing to grab. And looks like our gap all the way around is pretty good. And sometimes we'll see if this comes true on this repair. Might have to use like a little body saw like this. It's got a real thin, narrow blade, which is good if you like get it just a touch too big. You can trim along. Like if you have an overlapping line, you can just trim along and make one nice thin area to weld up. Make sure you set up your welder right for whatever you're welding. Usually inside there's a little guide that'll tell you how to set it up and make sure that it's set up for the thickness of material that you're working with and the diameter of wire that you're using. Fortunately, Miller has this auto set thing, which is really nice. You just tell it what thickness of wire you're using, what thickness of metal you're using, and it does the rest for you. All right, we've got our welder set up. We've got our ground strap on. We've almost got gloves on. All right, I got gloves on. Make sure you do something about your feet because the splatter from welding, if it goes inside your shoes, is one of the most miserable things ever. Trust me. All right, off to another corner. Okay, figured out my issue. Didn't have a good enough ground. So I fixed that. And now we're just going to go around. I'm just going to tack and feel, tack and feel. So it feels like it's a little low coming into this corner. And then I might have to go underneath and push this corner up because sometimes you can get to it, sometimes you can't. And sometimes you just have to go back and open it up a little bit more because the metal's going to expand and contract as you're welding it. So when you're welding super thin stuff like this, you've really got to take your time and go like a little bit here, a little bit over here, kind of work your way around, and that way you don't deform the rest of the panel by putting too much heat into it. All right, so I was telling you about the body saw. This is an instance where I definitely want to use it. You can see here, I got a good gap, but then you get over here and it's too large. So I'm just going to trim a little bit with this body saw. Made a real quick trim there. What I might have to do in this instance is push on it from behind a little bit with my hand while I tack it from this side. You can also use like another piece of scrap metal or a thin screwdriver. Something that you can. All right, now we can go kind of tack our way around the panel. All right, the panel is now welded up. Still a little warm. Yeah, I can touch it, but it's not ideal. So I did get a little bit more heat in it than I would have liked. You see it's got a little dimple right there. So might have to hammer and dolly that out. So the next step now is to grab my wheel and let's dress this area and we'll see how it actually looks once it's ground down and sort of smooth. So I ground down a bunch of my repair. You can see that this is not pro quality. This is not something you'd see on television. Well, because they don't show you on television. So there's still a lot of work to do here to smooth this out and make this perfect. I did get a little too much heat in it right here. and right here, mostly because I was in a hurry. And this is a scrap fender that's basically going to the junkyard as soon as I'm done with it. But I wanted to show you guys the procedure in how to do this at home. And like, I think a lot of people could do this repair just like this and skim coat this with some filler, and they would be happy with the repair and not have, boy, I really did put a bunch of heat into that thing, didn't I? And be happy with how it turned out overall. One thing to note, this is a Suzuki Cappuccino fender. It's Japanese K-car sheet metal, and it is some of the thinnest stuff ever. So it's really difficult to work, really difficult to weld. And if I would have used like a blowgun hooked to a compressor or a wet rag to quench some of the heat while I was doing it, that would have been a good idea. But we can look at the back of the fender. We can see there is good penetration all the way around. But I'd say overall it didn't do too bad. Like, for a quick job at home, this probably took 45 minutes to an hour to do all this. And it came out pretty good for an at-home repair. If you're considering doing this at home and have access to the tools, hopefully this helps you take the first leap and try it on your own. Biggest thing I can say is just take your time, do it in little tiny spots, use a rag or air compressor to blow air on it as you're doing it. That'll help keep the heat out of the panel. Heat's your enemy, but also heat's your friend, because you need it to weld the panel together. So that's it from Throttle Grotto. Check out some of the other videos we have on the channel if you like some of the projects we're doing here. And that's it for this time. Until next time, get out there and work on something.